Welcome to the Destiny Project, a Jewish view of world history. So in previous sessions, we discussed that history depends on perspective, and that this project, this series of sessions, will be an interpretation, understanding of history from the perspective of Classical Judaism. And the two most important fundamental principles of Classical Judaism are a belief in the existence of God and belief in the divine origin of the Torah. So in the previous sessions, we spoke about the existence of God and the purpose of creation, and in this session, we will discuss the divine origin of the Torah. So how do we know? We believe that the Torah came from God. It was given to us at Mount Sinai, and at least the Ten Commandments and the rest of the Torah was given to us while we were in the wilderness, studying and receiving all these different commandments. And it was complete when we came to Canaan and we established our nation in the land of Israel. The question is, what is the basis for this belief? How do we know that the Torah came from God? So there are two schools of thought. One school of thought says that you should prove it by philosophy. You should have arguments to proofs. There's a famous proof of the Kuzari, which I'm not going to get into here. It's a famous proof, but it's not completely conclusive. And others maybe have different philosophical approaches. And the other school of thought says that we should accept it with emunah peshutah. Emunah peshutah means simple faith. And even the Kuzari, who offers a philosophical proof, which he's like, not so sure about it himself, in the end he says that it's better to accept it on simple faith. So the question is, there has to be a rational basis for simple faith. If I were to tell you something and you should accept it on simple faith, why should you accept it on simple faith? There has to be a reason. So what is simple faith? And even if you don't prove the thing itself, but there has to be a reason why we accept something on simple faith. We came to us through tradition. Okay, so that's not a proof. Many people have traditions. Many different societies, religions have traditions. So we say, well, this is, Jewish people are more credible than other people, maybe, but there has to be a basis for it. I want to begin with a question, which, as you've noticed, I like to do that. But there are two events that happened at the time of Matan Torah. These were seminal events in the creation of the Jewish people. That time was an age of revelation. There were miraculous, this is what we believe, there were miraculous events took place. We were enslaved in Egypt, and God took us out of Egypt by showing miraculous plagues, and He took us out, supernaturally, and He brought us to Mount Sinai. And in Mount Sinai, we had the greatest revelation, where actually, in a certain sense, God came down on the mountain and spoke to us and gave us the Ten Commandments, which was beyond supernatural. That was the age of revelation. It was the age of revelation. Now, so these two events happened. We were enslaved in Egypt. There was the Exodus. We were taken out of Egypt. We were brought to Sinai, and at Sinai we were given the Torah. Which is more important to our identity as the Jewish people? I think it goes without saying that the giving of the Torah is more important. God could have done, of course, both are important and both play very important roles, but God could have done either one or the other. He could have taken us out of Egypt and not given us the Torah, or He could have brought us to Sinai and given us the Torah without having us being enslaved in Egypt for hundreds of years and taking us out. Maybe it wouldn't have been as good, but he could have done one or the other. So the question, if it's only one or the other, it goes without saying that the giving of the Torah is the main one, because that's what makes us a Jewish people. That's what we are. Otherwise, we would just be like other Gentile nations who were enslaved, and we were liberated, and that's it. What makes us Jewish? What makes us who we are? It is the Torah. It is our covenant with God, the covenant that we made with God at Sinai when we said, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do and we will hear, and we accepted the Torah, and that created a bond with God, a bond that lasts for all time. And that is who we are. So I would think that that is pretty clear. However, we know that there are Taryag mitzvahs, 613 mitzvahs. There are actually many more, but these are the 613 principal mitzvahs. Of these 613 mitzvahs, how many of them relate to the Exodus? There are about 125, I think maybe 124, but they're related in many ways. Some of them are directly related to the Exodus. Remember we went out of Egypt is a mitzvah. Eat matzah is a mitzvah. Bring a korban pesach is a mitzvah. Don't eat chametz is a mitzvah. Many mitzvahs are directly related to the Exodus, and many mitzvahs are tangentially related to the Exodus. You should love the ger. You should love the stranger. Why? Because you yourself were a stranger in the land of Egypt. So we are reminded about Egypt in that mitzvah. And there are many mitzvahs. Don't eat shrotzim, don't eat dead insects, because I am God who brought you out of Egypt. There's no direct connection between the two, but it is there in the mitzvah. We don't eat insects because God told us that He brought us out of Egypt, and therefore we should be holy and we should not eat insects. So again, we love the ger, the stranger, because God told us that we should never forget that we ourselves were strangers in the land of Egypt. Okay, so there are 125 mitzvahs that are constantly referring to the Exodus from Egypt. How many mitzvahs in the Torah refer to Matan Torah, refer to Sinai when we got the Torah? One. It's only one. There's a mitzvah, it's in Parshas V'eschanan, Yishomer l'cho shmor nafshcha ma'od, pentishcha chesed vor ma'ashror einecha, skipping little, Yom asher amato lefnei Hashem u'lekecha b'chorev, v'tamtum tachas ahar, v'ahar boyer ba'esh at lev hashamayim. Beware and watch yourself well, that you should not forget the things your eyes have seen, the day you stood before God, your Lord, at Chorev, which is Sinai. And you stood at the foot of the mountain, and the mountain was engulfed in flames until the heart of heaven. This is the mitzvah. Remember the stand of Sinai. That is the only mitzvah that in any way relates to Matan Torah. We don't have any kind of observances, any kind of rituals, nothing that relates to Matan Torah. Nothing. Nothing. Only this mitzvah. Why? We have so many rituals and observances that are connected to Yetzias Mitzrayim, to the Exodus. So why don't we have any that are connected, that memorialize and commemorate this fantastic day that we stood at Har Sinai, at the Mount, at Sinai, and God spoke to us and He gave us the Torah? I mean, why not? No, the mystery continues. In our prayers, we talk a lot about the Exodus. In Birchas Krishma and other places, we talk a lot about the Exodus. When we make Kiddush on Shabbos and on Yom Tov, we make Kiddush, say Zecher L'Yetzias Mitzrayim, Zecher L'Yetzias Mitzrayim. We're constantly commemorating and reminding ourselves that we went out of Egypt. There's a strange silence We don't talk about the giving of the Torah at Sinai. Why not? It's not mentioned in Tehillim, the Psalms, which is in Ayin Ches, Psalm 78, where there's a review of all of the ancient Jewish history. There's no mention of Sinai. Why is that mentioned? Why is this mysterious silence about Sinai? And so much talking about the Exodus, when Sinai is clearly more important than the Exodus. This is a question that I would like to present. Let me give you a hypothetical. There's a murderer in prison. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, and he's in prison. And 10 years later, he comes to the warden and says, "You have to let me go." I says, "Why? Why should I let you go?" So he says, "Because I read that the cells of a human body change over time, and after about 10 years, or maybe a little bit less, all the cells have been changed. All the cells are gone, new cells have replaced them. Even in the decision-making portion of the brain, the cells are replaced and by other cells. So right now, I am a completely new person. I didn't do anything. This new person that you see before you didn't do anything. So why are you keeping me in prison? You should let me go." Is this an argument? Obviously not. Why not? Because the person is the sum total of all the cells, but the entire person is the same person. Individual cells could go and leave and come back, and be replaced by others. But the entirety of the person never changes. The collective of the person never changes. The cells may come and go, but the collective never changes. Now, it's the same with societies. Societies are a collective, and the collective of a society is always the same. But the people, individual people, are the cells of that society. The society is composed of millions of cells, and some cells die, and other cells are born, and they replace them, but the society is the same. It doesn't change. It's the very same society. Now, we find I'm going to go through a number of things that the collective has. The collective can assume obligations. Speaking like in America, Americans know that Americans are obligated to the Constitution. There are certain rules that were put down in the Constitution, and Americans have rights and obligations. All of them go according to the Constitution. The Constitution was signed in the 1790 something, or in the late 18th century. There's nobody that was alive at that time still alive today. All those people are gone. They're all dead. Why should we be obligated to the Constitution? We never signed on it. So the answer is because American society is a collective, and that collective goes on. It was then, it's later and later and later. The collective was always there, it still is. But the obligations that the collective accepted on itself at that time, those obligations are still on the collective. Individuals can accept obligations as individuals, and then if they die, then those obligations come to an end. The children are not necessarily obligated to fulfill the obligations of their parents, but the society which accepts on it an obligation as a collective, then all the members of that society are obligated to honor those obligations for all generations, unless that society is somehow dismantled and there's some kind of, maybe the Russian Revolution, which dismantled Tsarist Russia, maybe that would be called that society no longer exists, and a new communist society was created. I don't know, that's, you decide. But as long as society still exists, as long as institutions are there, then the obligations devolve on all future members of that society. That's one thing. We also find that a society, a collective, can bear guilt and can need atonement. For instance, the Gemara says in Tamura, the Tezavav Beis, 15b, that when the Jewish people came back from exile in Babylon and Babel, they brought karbonas, they brought sacrifices to atone for the sin of idol worship, which they committed before they went into exile, which was 70 years. They were exiled with the destruction of the first temple. They were exiled for 70 years, and then they came back, rebuilt the temple, and then they brought sacrifices to atone for their sins at the end of at the first temple. Now, so the Gemara says there's a rule that you cannot bring a sin offering for a person who is dead. If a person is dead, then any sin offering he has is invalidated. It becomes puzzle. So how could they bring sacrifices for people that were dead? They all died. This is talking about 70, 80 years later. How could you bring sacrifices? So the Gemara says, this was not an individual sin offering. This was a sin offering, a public sin offering. It was a korban tzibur. It was a sacrifice brought on behalf of the collective. And ein hatzibur mesim. The collective never dies. The community, the congregation never dies. The congregation is alive. But people die, people are born. The congregation is always alive. And so we see that the collective can be guilty and need atonement. Just like the murderer, the collective of the murderer is guilty and has to be in prison even though his cells have all changed. Okay. Now, we have another thing about a collective. I'm just trying to help you understand that the idea of a collective, to see the collective as an organism, not as just a bunch of people, but it's its own organism, and the people are the cells of that organism. Now, the collective has a personality, because you see that, let's say for example, a family was leaving Poland, a Jewish family, and one son settled in Germany, and he raised a family in Germany. The same family, brothers, he raised a family in Germany. So his children will be pompous, they'll be efficient, they'll be punctual. That's what they're going to be like, even though they're Jewish kids, maybe even Hasidic kids, but they're growing up in German society, they're going to take on the personality of Germany. Another brother went to Italy. So the family that he raises is going to be passionate and outgoing. They're going to speak loudly. They're going to gesticulate with their hands because they've now, no matter who they were before, but the new generations who are part of this other society are going to take on the characteristics of that society. One of them goes to England. So the one that goes to England, his family that he raises, his children and his grandchildren will be well-mannered, they'll be reserved, unemotional, they'll have a stiff upper lip, they'll drink a lot of tea because they're in England. So the societies have personalities. And when you come and join the society, when you immigrate and you join the society, after a while, it doesn't happen the first day, but after a while, you take on the personalities of the overall, the general personality of that society. Now, something else that a collective has. It has a memory. Collectives remember. Now, how does that memory get passed down? Not by history books. It gets passed down through shared experience. I'll explain this to you. In 1999, there was a war in Kosovo. The Yugoslav Confederation collapsed, and Yugoslav Confederation was composed of a number of Balkan states, And once it collapsed, we had Croatia and Serbia and Bosnia and Kosovo. I'm not going to mention all of them. But so Serbia, in 1999, Serbia attacked Kosovo. And there was a very hot war then. It was a very big thing. And what was the war about? So it was about, I don't want to oversimplify. There were a lot of grievances and irredentism and many different things. But a lot of it reached back to hatred and a revenge that resulted from the Battle of Kosovo, in which the Serbs were defeated by the Ottoman Turks. And the Kosovars are Muslims, and the Turks are Muslims, so that was a very big factor, the Battle of Kosovo, like payback for the Battle of Kosovo. Just like in the Second World War, the Germans were motivated by payback for the defeat in the Treaty of Versailles. There were historical events that engender the desire for payback. And Kosovo, the Battle of Kosovo, was a very, very big deal in its time. And when did this is 1999. When did the Battle of Kosovo take place? It took place in 1389. That means over 600 years later, the passion, the anger, the hatred, the desire for revenge was still raging. It's not like it was something forgotten. It was still alive. So the Serbians and the Kosovars, 600 years later, remember the Battle of Kosovo. Why do they remember the Battle of Kosovo? Because they read about it in a history book when they were in school? No. It's because the society remembers it. That was passed down generation to generation. The great kings who fought there were national heroes. They sing songs about them. It just went on, and every new generation of children were indoctrinated into the glorious battle and the defeat, and we have to straighten this out someday and get revenge. We have to avenge ourselves for the death of our heroes. And it's all part of their life. It's part of their life. It doesn't come from something that they learned. They experienced it. They grew up with it. That memory is passed down through all the generations by the experience of their life. And their life is very much about that memory. So the society has a memory of the Battle of Kosovo, 600 years later. Let's just talk about the United States. In the United States, let's say another hypothetical. A famous professor writes a book, and his thesis is that black slavery in the United States is a myth. Never happened. Never happened. They were never slaves. They came here like regular immigrants, and they just came up with this myth because they want to get an advantage over the white population, but never happened. So so we say, what do you mean? Of course it happened. How do you prove it? How do you know? Because there were no slaves alive, no slave owners alive, because it says in the history books. Well, history books lie. Very often they lie. Because we have documents. Documents can be forged. We have photographs. Photographs can be faked, especially with today's sophisticated equipment, with Photoshop and everything. You could fake documents. That's not that. Documents and pictures. We have testimony from slaves that were emancipated. They were lying. Where's the proof? Do we have conclusive proof that there was black slavery in the United States? Do we? Evidence. But we do, because American society remembers it. Today's social consciousness of American society, it's all about race. It's all about black slavery. It's all about bigotry and resentment and reparations and the whole. It's not like something that happened and it was over and now we're moved on and we're living peacefully together and everything's fine. So did it happen then or not? It has no effect on our life now. So maybe it did happen, maybe it didn't. You want to argue it didn't happen? All right. I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't stake my life on it that it did happen. Maybe it did. Maybe it didn't. But this is our life is about it. With the American society, American life is Black Lives Matter, Ku Klux Klan. It's all about black slavery. So of course it happened. American society remembers it. You know, they have something called, does American society remember Lincoln? Yeah, of course. Does American society remember Washington? I think yes. I think so. Does American society remember Columbus? No, we don't have any living memory of Columbus. Columbus is something that we learn about in history. Yeah, well, you know, we believe it, why not? But if somebody will say that there was no Columbus and it was really somebody else and this and that, like, who's to know? You know, we're going to start doing the research and figure it out. We do not have a memory of Columbus, but we do have a memory of Lincoln. We do have a memory of black slavery. We do have a memory of a civil war that was fought over black slavery. Yes, we do have a memory of it. Now, there's a phenomenon called Holocaust denial. Some people deny the Holocaust. Some of these extreme right-wing groups say it never happened, and they dispute the evidence. They say it's a lie. They say, well, look, how come there's no traces of Cyclone B gas in the stones? And they have a whole argument. Holocaust denial. Holocaust denial. Did the Holocaust take place? To me, it's impossible to deny it. I was born after the Holocaust, but I grew up with it. I grew up among survivors. I grew up, everything was about the Holocaust. The memory of the Holocaust was living in my family, was living in my society, was living in my community. It was a living memory. You couldn't deny it to me. It's ridiculous. But if you go to some kind of farm boy in Kansas who never saw a Jew and doesn't know anything about Jews, and he heard that this thing is the Holocaust, then you could tell him, no, it's not true, it didn't happen. And he wouldn't really know, because he has no memory of it. So then he's going to start investigating the proof, the evidence. You tell him, no, the evidence is disputed. But to me, the evidence is irrelevant. It's my memory. I remember the Holocaust. Now, do my children remember the Holocaust? I would say they do, because they knew their grandparents. They knew people that they know me, who I remember it. They probably maybe will even have seen some survivors with tattooed numbers on their forearms. Yeah. Would my great-grandchildren remember the Holocaust? Maybe not. Maybe not. I mean, it doesn't play a role in their lives. I mean, we have Yom HaShoah. Yom HaShoah is, I guess, it's better than nothing, but it's like one day when we talk about the Shoah, and the 364 days we don't talk about the Shoah. It doesn't play a role in their lives. They don't have a living memory of it. So maybe after a while, maybe it will be forgotten. We've had other Holocausts in our history. We had the Holocaust in 1648, where the Khmelnytsky massacres, where very few people know about it. They maybe recently, because of some books, they know about it, including one that I wrote called The Year of the Sword. But when I wrote that book and I did sort of a survey among people to how much they know about it, practically nothing. There were other things. The Crusades, yeah, maybe they know about things, but it's not really. We don't have living memories of those events. We have living memory of the Holocaust now, but maybe as time goes on, we won't. Is that a sad thing? Perhaps. Should we do something about it? Perhaps. That's not my point here. What I'm trying to say is that the people that have a living memory, then you don't need evidence. You have the memory. So, the Torah gives us 2 commandments regarding the age of revelation, as I call it. That period when we saw God, we saw His supernatural deeds, that period. He doesn't have to do it every day. Like, do we say, like, what's He done lately? I mean, he's not, if He wants to reveal Himself to us, He did. And then we have commandments, we have mitzvahs, 2 mitzvahs. Remember the day that you left Egypt. Remember it. And the one that I said before, be careful, don't forget what you saw when you stood at the foot of Mount Sinai. Remember them. So the revelation was then, and we have an obligation by mitzvah in the Torah to remember it. To put it, it should be part of our collective memory. We need to remember it. Now, so today, we remember that God revealed Himself to us at that time. We need to remember that. But how do we remember it? We saw that the other things that we spoke about, the other memories, Kosovo and American racism, these memories are driven by passion, by hatred, by anger. But the Jewish people look after the Holocaust. Look after the Holocaust. Are we motivated to take revenge? Are we full of anger and hatred and burning desire to go ahead and hit back at the Germans? That is not Jewish people. Jewish people are happy to have survived and to move on and to have a successful life and bring up their children. This is what Jewish people are. They move on. They're not driven by those kind of basic passions and anger and hatred. They're not. So how will we remember the age of revelation if we don't have these kind of passions? So the genius of the Torah and the genius of the sages who formulated our liturgy and our prayers is they took the memory of these events, of the Exodus from Egypt. They took the memory of the Exodus from Egypt and they wove it into the fabric of our lives, that every day, from morning to night, whatever we do, almost, we commemorate that memory. We remind ourselves we do this because of Egypt. We make Kiddush because to remember that we were taken out of Egypt. We eat matzah. Pesach is the main conduit of the memory, where we just spend the whole time just telling it to the children, and we eat matzah to remind ourselves of what happened then, and we don't eat chametz, and we drink the 4 cups of wine. All our rituals, all our observances, over 100 of them, somehow are about the Exodus from Egypt. So this means that this is more than of course, as if we invest these rituals with religious passion, it makes them more powerful. But even if they're not so invested with religious passion, this is our life. This is how we live. This is what we do. We put on tefillin and we put on tzitzis and we pray and we mention Mitzrayim, and all the time, wherever we turn, it's all about the Exodus. So it is part of our life, and by being part of our life, the memory can live forever. Now, why did the Torah and why did the Chazal, the sages, why did they choose to build the memory on the Exodus? Why didn't they choose to build the memory on the giving of the Torah, which is more crucial to our identity than the Exodus, as we spoke earlier? The reason is because we can have a memory of the Exodus because it can't exist in our minds. We suffered, we were given backbreaking work, we had these harsh slave masters, there were frogs, there were locusts, there were different things that happened which we can get our minds around them. So we can build our memory on the events that happened during our enslavement in Egypt and our exodus, our liberation. We can get our minds around it. So that type of a memory can exist in our mind, and it could go on and on and on all the time, from generation to generation, forever, through all the rituals and the observances that form the fabric of our lives. That carries all these memories forward. We live the memory. However, the memory of Sinai is very difficult, because Sinai, you saw God. You saw God come down on the mountain and talk to you. You heard things that were a human being cannot see them, cannot hear them. It was a prophecy. All of the Jews standing at the foot of the mountain were given the gift of prophecy, and they had a prophetic encounter with God. We have no idea what that looks like. We cannot get our minds around that. What does it look like to see Belivnus HaSapir, to see all these things, and you see the sounds, and then two things are said simultaneously? Like, how do you can't, it can't live in our minds. So you cannot build a memory on Sinai. You could only build a memory on Yetzias Mitzrayim. So therefore, everything is about Mitzrayim. Why? Because the Exodus from Mitzrayim, where were we going? We were counting the days. We were counting Sphira. We were going out and we're counting the days to come to the mountain, to come to Sinai, to get the Torah. So through the Exodus, we can get some kind of a memory about Sinai. That can keep Sinai alive. We can remember that there was Sinai because we remember that there was an Exodus, and the context of Exodus, there was a Sinai, and that could go on from generation to generation. But the mountain itself, the stand at the mountain itself, now the Torah says you should remember. You should remember. Zechar b'al tishkach. Be careful not to forget. So what can you remember? So the Bach says in Siman Mem Zayin that you remember the fire, that there was a fire. That was a physical thing. The mountain was engulfed in flame. There was a physical fire. A physical fire we can remember. We can remember that we were standing by a mountain that was engulfed in flame. And you'll notice that when we're told about the mountain being engulfed in flame, at the time of the giving of the Torah in Parshas Yisro, it just says that the mountain was burning. But when we're told about the mitzvah to remember, and the only thing we can remember is the fire, so the Torah tells us that the mountain was engulfed in flame all the way, ad leiv hashemayim, all the way up to the heaven. Up to the sky, it was engulfed in flame, which the Torah took this little detail, because it's only a small detail. The fire was really, the main thing was the prophecy, but that the mountain was burning was a detail. So, but since that detail's all you can remember, so the Torah took that detail and it enhanced it for us and told us it wasn't just a fire, it was a fire that rose up all the way up to the sky. That's what the Torah did. So and you'll notice also that when we talk about the Exodus, Yetzias Mitzrayim, we say Zochar, remember. When we talk about Sinai, we say be careful not to forget. Remembering is very difficult because it's difficult to remember, but don't forget it. Remember it in the context of the Exodus. You should remember it. So this is how we know. This is how we know that there was an Exodus and there was a giving of the Torah. It is part of our memory, and I think that is what is meant by emunah peshutah, by a simple faith. What does simple faith mean? Why have simple faith? Simple faith means that you don't need evidence. You don't need proof. Look at your life. Look at the way you live. Look at the way your parents lived, your grandparents lived. You are living the memory. You live the memory. You're living the memory. You know that it's true, because memory is the strongest evidence. Memory cannot be denied. Anyway, thank you very much, and I hope to see you again next time. Thank you.